a fisherman sees something thrashing in the water, and without thinking twice he jumps into dangerous waves to save a drowning dolphin tangled in fishing nets. And when he finally frees her and watches her swim away, he has no idea that 3 weeks later, during the worst storm of his life, when his boat is sinking and a shark is circling and he is seconds away from death, that same dolphin will appear out of nowhere and risk everything to save him back. How does a wild animal remember a stranger who helped her once, and how does she find him in the middle of a violent ocean storm at the exact moment he needs her most? This is the story of a man who thought he was completely alone in this world until an animal proved him wrong in a way he will never forget, and I promise you what happens at the end of this story will stay with you for a long time. His name was Thomas Harlow, and he was 63 years old, and he had spent nearly his entire life on the water off the coast of North Carolina in a small fishing town that most people had never even heard of. Thomas was not a man who talked much, and he was not a man who asked for help, and if you saw him walking down the dock early in the morning with his worn boots and faded jacket and a thermos of black coffee, you might assume he was content, but the truth is Thomas had been carrying a kind of quiet sadness for years. His wife Clara had passed away 4 years earlier after a long illness, and since then the house had felt too big and too quiet, and the only place Thomas felt any kind of peace was out on the water, where the noise in his head seemed to fade and where the motion of the waves reminded him that the world was still moving even when he felt stuck. He had a small fishing boat called the Blue Jay, and every morning before sunrise he would take it out about 5 miles from the shore where the fish were plentiful and the silence was deep, and he would spend hours out there alone, not because he loved fishing but because he did not know what else to do with himself. That morning in late September started like every other morning, and the sky was grey and the air was cool, and Thomas motored out past the jetties with his lines ready and his mind somewhere far away, and he had no idea that this particular day was about to change everything. About 2 hours into his trip he noticed something strange in the water maybe 200 yards away, and at first he thought it was debris or a piece of garbage caught in the current, but as he got closer he saw movement, and then he heard a sound that made his chest tighten. It was a dolphin, and she was in serious trouble. She was tangled in an old fishing net that had wrapped around her dorsal fin and her tail, and every time she tried to swim the net pulled her under and she would thrash back up gasping for air before sinking again. Thomas could see the panic in her movements, and he could see the exhaustion setting in, and he knew that if no one helped her she would drown within the hour. He looked around and there was no one else out there, and the Coast Guard was too far, and by the time anyone responded it would be too late, and so Thomas did what most people would be too afraid to do. He cut his engine and grabbed his knife, and without giving himself time to overthink it he climbed over the side of his boat and dropped into the cold water. The current was stronger than he expected, and the waves kept pushing him back, and every time he got close to the dolphin she would thrash in fear and pull away, and he realized he had to slow down and let her understand that he was not a threat. So he floated there for a moment just a few feet away, and he talked to her in a low calm voice the way he used to talk to Clara when she was scared, and he told her it was going to be okay and that he was not going to hurt her, and slowly, very slowly, she stopped thrashing. Her dark eye locked onto his, and in that moment something passed between them, something Thomas could not explain, and then she went still as if she understood. He moved closer, and the net was wrapped so tightly around her body that his hands were shaking as he tried to cut through it, and the waves kept crashing over both of them, and several times he went under and came up coughing, but he did not stop. One by one he sliced through the tangled cords, and when the last piece finally fell away the dolphin did not immediately swim off, and instead she stayed there in the water right next to him, and she looked at him one more time with that same deep eye, and Thomas swore later that she was thanking him. Then she turned and disappeared beneath the surface, and Thomas climbed back into his boat soaking wet and exhausted, and he sat there for a long time just staring at the water, and he did not tell anyone what happened that day because he did not think anyone would believe him. The next few weeks passed quietly, and Thomas returned to his routine, and the memory of the dolphin faded into the background of his days, and he figured that was the end of it and that he would never see her again, and that was fine because helping her had been enough. But the ocean had other plans. On the morning of October 14th, Thomas woke up to a sky that looked wrong, and the clouds were low and thick, and the air had a pressure to it that made his ears feel full, and he knew a storm was coming, but the weather report said it would not hit until evening, and he needed the catch because money was tight, and so against his better judgment he took the Blue Jay out anyway. For the first few hours everything was fine, and he caught more fish than he had in weeks, and he thought maybe he had made the right call, but then around noon the wind changed direction and the sky turned from grey to black, and the waves started to rise in a way that made his stomach drop. Thomas had been through storms before, but this one came fast and hard, and within minutes the swells were 10 feet high and the rain was coming down sideways and he could barely see the bow of his own boat. He tried to turn back toward shore, but the engine sputtered and choked and then it died completely, and no matter what he did it would not start again, and now he was drifting in open water with no power and no way to call for help because his radio had shorted out from the water pouring into the cabin. The fear hit him all at once, and it was the kind of fear that makes your legs weak and your thoughts scatter, and he grabbed onto the railing and held on as the boat was tossed like a toy, and he thought about Clara, and he thought about how maybe this was how it was supposed to end and maybe he would see her again soon. But then something happened that turned his fear into terror. Through the rain and the spray he saw a shape moving in the water, and at first he thought it was a wave, but then he saw the fin and he knew exactly what it was. A shark! It was circling the boat slowly and deliberately, and Thomas knew that if he went into the water he would not last long, and the boat was taking on water fast and he had maybe 10 minutes before it went under, and he realized with a sickening clarity that he was going to die out here alone and no one would even know what happened to him. He closed his eyes and he whispered Clara's name and he waited for the end. And that is when he heard it. A sound cutting through the storm. A series of clicks and whistles that were somehow louder than the wind and the rain, and Thomas opened his eyes and looked out at the water and he could not believe what he was seeing. It was the dolphin. The same dolphin. He knew it was her because he could see the scar on her dorsal fin where the net had cut into her, and she was swimming straight toward the boat, and she was not alone. There were 2 other dolphins with her and they moved in perfect formation, and as they reached the boat the shark turned toward them, and what happened next still gives Thomas chills to this day. The 3 dolphins charged at the shark again and again, ramming it with their snouts and driving it away from the boat, and the shark fought back at first, but the dolphins were relentless, and finally it turned and disappeared into the dark water, and Thomas was shaking so hard he could barely stand. But the danger was not over because the boat was sinking, and Thomas knew he had to get into the water and swim for shore, even though the shore was more than 2 miles away and he had no strength left. He lowered himself into the waves and the cold hit him like a punch and he started to swim, but the current was too strong and he kept getting pulled under, and he could feel his arms giving out, and he thought, this is it, this is where I drown. And then she was there. The dolphin was right beside him and she pressed her body against his and she pushed him up to the surface and she stayed with him. Every time he started to sink she nudged him back up, and every time a wave crashed over him she was there to guide him through it, and she swam with him stroke by stroke for what felt like hours, and Thomas later learned that she guided him nearly 1.5 miles through that storm. The other 2 dolphins swam alongside them keeping watch, and when Thomas's feet finally touched sand and he collapsed on the beach gasping and crying, he turned back to look at the water and she was still there. She was floating just beyond the break watching him, and even from that distance he could see her, and he raised his hand and he swore she dipped her head in response. But then he noticed something that made his heart stop. She was not swimming right. She was listing to one side and there was a dark mark on her flank, and he realized that during the fight with the shark she had been injured. She had risked her life for him and now she was hurt. Thomas did not hesitate. He waded back into the water even though his body was screaming at him to stop, and he reached her and he could see the gash on her side where the shark had caught her, and he did not know what to do, but he knew he could not leave her. He stayed with her in the shallows and he called for help on a stranger's phone, and within an hour a marine rescue team arrived and they stabilized her, and they told Thomas that if he had not stayed with her she probably would have beached herself and died. He visited her every day while she recovered at the rehabilitation center, and the staff said they had never seen a wild dolphin respond to a human the way she responded to him, and when she was finally released 3 weeks later Thomas was there on the beach and he watched her swim out into the open water, and this time when she looked back at him he did not feel sad. He felt something he had not felt in years. He felt like he was not alone anymore. Some people say animals do not remember, and some people say they do not feel loyalty the way we do, but Thomas knows the truth because he lived it, and he will tell you that the ocean is full of things we do not understand, and that kindness has a way of coming back to you even when you least expect it and even from the most unlikely places. He still fishes off that same coast, and sometimes when the water is calm and the light is just right he sees a dolphin with a scar on her dorsal fin swimming just beyond the waves, and he raises his hand and she dips her head, and that is all they need. If this story moved you, I want you to comment the word loyalty, because I believe animals remember kindness, and I believe this world needs more people like Thomas who are willing to risk everything for a life that is not their own. And if you know someone who loves the ocean or who needs to hear a story about hope and connection, please share this video with them, because stories like this remind us that we are all connected in ways we cannot see, and that sometimes the ones who save us are the ones we saved first.